They fired me for budget cuts. Then I quietly took their biggest client. I never thought I would be betrayed by people I trusted, especially not in a sterile conference room that smelled of cheap coffee and broken promises. The words budget cuts still echo in my mind, but what haunts me more is the way my manager avoided eye contact while delivering the news. It wasn't just the humiliation of being escorted out like a common criminal. It was discovering the depth of their deception weeks later. As I sat in my car afterward, hands trembling on the steering wheel, I realized I'd been living a lie. The company I had poured my heart into for 3 years had been planning this moment long before they claimed financial hardship. I didn't know it then, but their betrayal would become the catalyst for something I never imagined I was capable of. I could have wallowed in self-pity. I could have accepted their narrative and quietly disappeared. But as I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I knew I had a choice. I could let this define me as a victim, or I could rewrite the entire story. What they didn't realize was that their biggest mistake wasn't firing me. It was underestimating what I would do next. My name is Evelyn, and 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where my life was headed. I had a corner office on the 15th floor, a team that respected me, and what I believed was job security built on 5 years of exceeding every target they set. I was the kind of employee who stayed late without being asked, who solved problems before they became crises, who genuinely cared about the company's success as if it were my own child. The morning they called me into the conference room, I actually thought they were offering me a promotion. I had just closed the Morrison account, a deal worth $2 million that I had been nurturing for 8 months. The client specifically requested to work with me, and I had spent countless evenings refining proposals, understanding their needs, building a relationship that went beyond mere transactions. But there I sat, facing 3 people I had considered mentors, watching them deliver rehearsed lines about restructuring and difficult economic decisions. My manager, Janet, whom I had shared coffee with just that morning, couldn't meet my eyes. The HR representative slid a severance package across the polished table as if it were a peace offering, her smile practiced and hollow. "Budget cuts," she said, the words falling like stones into still water. "We're eliminating several positions across multiple departments." I should have asked questions. I should have demanded explanations. Instead, I sat there in stunned silence, my mind struggling to process the disconnect between their words and reality. Just last week, they had hired 2 new executives. The company had just announced record quarterly profits. None of it made sense, but in that moment I was too shocked to fight back. The security escort was the final insult. 20 minutes to clear out 5 years of my professional life, while a guard watched to ensure I didn't steal company secrets. My personal photos, the plant I had nursed from a cutting, the awards I had earned, all stuffed hastily into a cardboard box that felt impossibly heavy as I walked through the office one last time. My colleagues avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens or urgent phone calls. The silence was deafening. I realized then that humiliation has a weight to it, pressing down on your shoulders, making each step feel like you're walking through quicksand. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I caught a glimpse of Janet through the glass conference room walls. She was already in another meeting, laughing at something someone had said. Life was moving on without me, as if I had never existed. As if 5 years of dedication could be erased with a signature on a termination letter. Standing in the parking garage, I felt something crack inside me, not breaking but shifting. The humiliation was real, the betrayal cut deep, but underneath it all, a quiet anger was beginning to simmer. I didn't know it yet, but this moment would become the first chapter of a completely different story. Will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? In the days that followed, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by the remnants of my professional life, the memories began surfacing like debris after a storm. The firing wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller betrayals I had chosen to ignore rationalize, or simply endure. I remembered the quarterly review 6 months ago when Janet had praised my collaborative spirit while simultaneously giving the promotion I deserved to Marcus, who had been with the company for half as long. "You're such a team player, Evelyn," she had said, her smile warm and reassuring. "We need people like you, who don't need the spotlight to shine." I had accepted her words as a compliment, choosing to believe that my worth wasn't measured by titles or recognition. Then there were the late-night emails, the weekend emergencies that only I seemed capable of handling, the Morrison deal that made me a hero for exactly 1 week before they moved on to the next crisis, the next impossible deadline. I'd worn my availability like a badge of honor, never questioning why my dedication was expected rather than appreciated. The meeting invitations that somehow never reached me. The strategic planning sessions I wasn't included in, despite managing the accounts they were discussing. "Oh, we didn't want to overwhelm you," Marcus would say with that practiced concern. "You're already handling so much." Each exclusion chipped away at my influence, my visibility, my voice, until I was essential to the daily operations, but invisible in the big picture. I thought about Sarah from marketing, who had stopped eating lunch with me months ago. The conversations that would halt when I entered a room, followed by awkward smiles and quick subject changes. The way my ideas were received with polite nods in meetings, only to be presented by someone else weeks later as brilliant innovations. I'd convinced myself it was coincidence, that I was being paranoid, that good work would speak for itself. The cruelest realization was how they had used my own integrity against me. They knew I would never complain, never make waves, never demand what I was worth. They counted on my professionalism to enable their exploitation. Every time I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up, every time I smiled when I should have shown anger, I had been complicit in my own diminishment. Sitting there in the silence of my apartment, I felt the weight of years of accumulated wounds. Each small betrayal had felt manageable at the time, like paper cuts that barely registered. But paper cuts can bleed you dry if there are enough of them, and I was finally seeing the pattern that had been invisible to me for so long. The anger was building now, not the explosive kind that burns out quickly, but the slow, steady heat of a forge. They had taken my loyalty and turned it into a weapon against me. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my dedication for desperation. But most of all, they had underestimated the power of someone who finally sees the truth. I began to understand that the humiliation in that conference room wasn't the beginning of my story. It was the moment I finally woke up from a dream that had been slowly becoming a nightmare. Can I confront the hidden wounds, or will they remain buried forever? Section 3. The decision to act. Taking control, it was on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the firing, that everything changed. I was sitting at my kitchen table, still in my pajamas at noon, scrolling mindlessly through job listings that all seemed to blur together. The apartment felt smaller each day, the walls closing in with the weight of my inaction. I had been existing in this liminal space between my old life and whatever came next, paralyzed by the enormity of starting over. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, a former colleague who had quit 6 months earlier to start her own consulting firm. "Coffee later. I have something interesting to tell you about your old company." Something in her tone, even through text, made my pulse quicken. When we met that afternoon, Lisa leaned across the small cafe table, her voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't fire you for budget cuts, Evelyn. They fired you because you were getting too close to the Morrison contract renewal. They wanted to assign it to Marcus before the client specifically requested you again." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I still have friends there. The Morrison family called the day after you were let go, asking to speak with you directly about expanding their contract. Janet had to explain that you were no longer with the company due to restructuring. The client was furious. They're now considering pulling their business entirely." I sat there, coffee growing cold in my hands as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had betrayed their own company's interests to protect their fragile egos and maintain their power structure. The Morrison deal I had built from nothing was worth more than my salary for the next 5 years, and they were willing to risk losing it rather than acknowledge my value. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, my mind racing with possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider before. For years, I had played by their rules, accepted their limitations, believed their narrative about what I was worth. But what if I stopped asking for permission and started taking what was mine? I pulled out my laptop and began researching business licenses, consulting regulations, competitive analysis. The idea that had been a whisper in the back of my mind suddenly became a roar. I could start my own firm. I had the skills, the experience, and now I understood I had something even more valuable. I had relationships with clients who valued me personally, not just the company name on my business card. The Morrison family knew my work. They had requested me specifically, trusted my judgment, relied on my expertise. What if I reached out to them directly? Not to steal anything, but to offer them the personalized service they deserved, free from corporate bureaucracy and office politics. As I made lists and researched competitors, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my professional future. For the first time since that devastating conference room meeting, I wasn't thinking about what had been done to me. I was thinking about what I could do. The victim narrative that had consumed me for weeks began to crack and crumble. Yes, they had wronged me. Yes, they had underestimated me. But their biggest mistake wasn't firing me. It was giving me the freedom to compete with them on my own terms. I realized that I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into their small vision of who I should be. Now, with nothing left to lose and everything to gain, I could finally expand to my full potential. The question wasn't whether I deserved better. It was whether I had the courage to go out and create it myself. Can I find the courage to change my life? Or will I hesitate when it matters most? The next 3 weeks became a masterclass in strategic planning. I approached my new venture with the same methodical precision I had once applied to client proposals, except this time, every decision was mine to make. I wasn't asking for approval or seeking consensus. I was building something that would speak for itself. First, I researched the legal landscape with obsessive thoroughness. Non-compete clauses, client contact restrictions, intellectual property laws. I needed to understand exactly where the boundaries were so I could dance right up to them without crossing any lines. My former company had been careless with their termination paperwork. Their standard non-compete was riddled with loopholes that my lawyer friend confirmed were largely unenforceable in our state. I spent hours studying my former employer's client roster, identifying accounts where I had been the primary relationship builder. The Morrison contract was the crown jewel, but there were others, smaller businesses who had grown to trust my judgment over the years. I made careful notes about their current challenges, their expansion plans, their frustrations with corporate bureaucracy that I had witnessed firsthand. The beauty of my plan wasn't in stealing anything, it was in offering something better. I could provide the personalized attention that a large firm simply couldn't match. No layers of management, no competing priorities, no junior associates learning on their client's time. Just expertise, dedication, and the kind of authentic relationships that big corporations struggle to maintain. I registered my business on a Wednesday morning, choosing a name that was professional but approachable: Everstone Consulting Solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. My new company's initials were my own. After years of hiding behind someone else's brand, I was finally putting my name on my work. My home office setup was strategic, not desperate. I invested in quality equipment, professional phone systems, and marketing materials that positioned me as an established consultant, not a desperate ex-employee. Every detail had to convey competence and stability. First impressions would be everything. The timing of my outreach would be crucial. I couldn't appear eager or vindictive, but I also couldn't wait so long that my former company had time to solidify new relationships with my old clients. I planned to wait exactly 1 month after my termination before making any direct contact. Enough time to establish my business properly. Not so long that I'd be forgotten. I drafted and redrafted my initial communication to the Morrison family, striking the perfect balance between professional courtesy and subtle criticism of corporate limitations. I would frame my departure as an opportunity to provide them with more focused, personalized service. I wouldn't badmouth my former employer directly, but I would make it clear that independence had freed me to prioritize their needs in ways that corporate structure had prevented. The most satisfying part of the planning wasn't imagining their shock when they learned what I was doing. It was visualizing the moment when my success would speak louder than any explanation I could offer. They had bet that I would disappear quietly, that my value was tied to their platform. I was about to prove them catastrophically wrong. Every spreadsheet I created, every business plan I refined, every professional contact I reached out to, it all felt like justice being served one careful step at a time. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. This was about reclaiming my worth and proving that they had just made the most expensive mistake of their careers. Will I feel victorious when it's over? Or will the consequences leave me feeling empty? The moment I had been preparing for arrived on a crisp Thursday morning. I sat in my home office, dressed in my best suit, despite the fact that no one would see me, staring at the phone number I had memorized weeks ago. The Morrison family's direct line. My finger hovered over the dial button for what felt like an eternity before I finally pressed it. James Morrison speaking. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Warm, direct, businesslike but approachable. Mr. Morrison, this is Evelyn Chen. I worked on your account at Henderson and Associates until recently. I hope you have a moment to speak. The pause that followed felt eternal, but when he spoke again, his tone shifted to something almost relieved. Evelyn, we've been trying to reach you. They told us you were no longer with the company due to restructuring. But frankly, we were devastated. You understood our business better than anyone there. The conversation that followed was everything I had hoped for, and more. James explained their frustration with the transition to Marcus, who had scheduled 3 meetings and cancelled 2 of them. The new proposals felt generic, copy-and-paste solutions that ignored the specific challenges we had spent months identifying together. To be honest, James continued, we were considering ending our relationship with Henderson entirely. The personal touch we valued seems to have disappeared with your departure. I took a steady breath, feeling the power shift in my favor. Mr. Morrison, I understand your frustration completely. That's actually why I'm calling. I've recently established my own consulting firm, Everstone Consulting Solutions, and I'd love the opportunity to continue supporting your family's business interests with the personalized attention you deserve. The silence on the other end wasn't hesitation, it was the sound of a decision being made. Within 2 hours, I had my first client meeting scheduled for the following week. James Morrison wasn't just interested. He was eager to move forward. The retainer he proposed was 30% higher than what Henderson had been charging, and he wanted to expand the scope of work beyond what we had originally discussed. But the Morrison call was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I reached out to 3 other former clients, smaller accounts, but ones where I had built genuine relationships. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: relief at hearing from me, frustration with their current service, and genuine interest in working with my new firm. The most satisfying call came from Maria Gonzalez, who ran a mid-sized manufacturing company. Evelyn, I was actually planning to call Henderson today to request you specifically for our Q4 planning. When they told me last month that you were no longer available, I almost took our business elsewhere. This is perfect timing. By Friday afternoon, I had secured 4 clients and had preliminary discussions with 2 more. My first month's revenue projections had tripled, and I hadn't even officially launched yet. Each conversation reinforced what I had always suspected but never fully believed. My value wasn't tied to the Henderson and Associates brand. If anything, their corporate bureaucracy had been limiting my potential. The real confrontation came when Janet called my personal phone that evening. Her voice was strained, professional, but with an undercurrent of barely controlled anger. "Evelyn, I think we need to talk. It's come to our attention that you've been contacting our clients." I felt that familiar surge of adrenaline. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was the calm strength of someone who knows exactly where they stand. "Hello, Janet. Actually, I've been contacted by several businesses looking for consulting services. I'm simply meeting market demand. These are Henderson clients, Evelyn. This is highly irregular. These are businesses that have the right to choose their service providers," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "I'm not violating any agreements, and I'm certainly not preventing them from continuing their relationship with Henderson if they choose to do so." The conversation continued for several more tense minutes, with Janet alternating between veiled threats and attempts at reconciliation. She even suggested that Henderson might be interested in a partnership arrangement with my new firm. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. When I finally hung up, I realized something profound had shifted. The woman who had sat silently in that conference room 6 weeks ago, accepting humiliation with quiet dignity, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. Will I feel relieved after this, or will it leave me questioning everything? The weeks following my successful client acquisitions should have felt like victory. My calendar was full, my bank account was growing, and industry contacts were reaching out with referrals. Everstone Consulting was exceeding every projection I had made. On paper, I had won, yet sitting in my home office late at night, surrounded by the evidence of my professional triumph, I felt an unexpected hollowness. The satisfaction I had anticipated was fleeting, like sugar that provides instant energy but leaves you crashing hours later. I'd proven my worth, reclaimed my clients, and watched my former company scramble to contain the damage. But something was still missing. The validation felt good, but it was external. James Morrison's praise, Maria's gratitude, the growing reputation of my firm, these were all reflections of my professional capabilities. But they didn't address the deeper wounds that had been festering for years. I'd been so focused on proving them wrong that I hadn't taken time to heal what they had damaged in the first place. In quiet moments between client calls, I found myself replaying not just the firing, but all those smaller betrayals that had led up to it. The anger was still there, but now it was complicated by a growing awareness that my response had been reactive rather than restorative. I had been so determined to show them my value that I was still, in a way, letting them define my worth. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd left Henderson and Associates to escape their control, but I was still operating within their framework. My success was meaningful primarily because it was their failure. My satisfaction came from their regret rather than from genuine fulfillment. I was free from their employment, but not from their influence over my emotional well-being. There were moments when I caught myself checking Henderson's LinkedIn page, looking for signs of their struggle to replace the clients I had taken. When I learned that Marcus had been reassigned and Janet was facing pressure from upper management, I felt a surge of vindictive pleasure that immediately left me feeling smaller, not larger. The client work itself was fulfilling. I loved the problem-solving, the relationship-building, the creative challenge of growing businesses. But the foundation of my new venture was built partially on resentment, and resentment, I was learning, was the unstable foundation for anything meant to last. I realized that while I had reclaimed my professional power, I hadn't yet reclaimed my peace. The girl who had sat silently through years of diminishment was still inside me, still carrying those wounds, still measuring her worth against their recognition. Success had given me armor, but it hadn't healed what was underneath. Late one evening, as I reviewed the quarter's financials that showed numbers beyond my wildest expectations, I found myself asking a question I hadn't anticipated. Was this enough? Had proving them wrong actually proven anything to myself, or had I simply become very good at performing strength while the hurt remained untouched? The professional victory was real and meaningful, but I was beginning to understand that true empowerment would require something deeper than external validation. No matter how satisfying, has revenge really brought me peace, or is there more healing to be done? The breakthrough came on an ordinary Tuesday morning in December, 6 months after that devastating conference room meeting. I was preparing for a client presentation when my phone rang with an unexpected call. It was Janet, and for the first time since our confrontational conversation months earlier, her tone was different, not defeated, but genuinely respectful. "Evelyn, I'm calling to extend an offer. Henderson and Associates would like to propose a partnership. We've been watching your success, and we believe there could be mutual benefit in combining our resources with your client relationships and expertise." 6 months ago, this call would have felt like the ultimate vindication. They were essentially admitting they had made a mistake, that they needed me more than I needed them. But as I listened to Janet outline their proposal, generous terms, profit sharing, my name on the door, I felt something unexpected. Complete indifference. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even temptation. Just a calm recognition that what they were offering was irrelevant to who I had become. "I appreciate the offer, Janet," I heard myself saying, "but I'm not interested. I've built something here that aligns with my values and serves my clients in ways that wouldn't be possible in a larger organization." After I hung up, I sat quietly in my office, trying to understand the shift that had occurred. When had their opinion stopped mattering? When had I stopped measuring my worth against their recognition? The answer came to me gradually. It had happened in 1,000 small moments over the past months. Each time I had solved a client's problem without seeking approval from a committee. Each time I had made a decision based on what was right rather than what was politic. Each time I had spoken honestly in a meeting instead of calculating the political implications of my words. Realized that the real transformation hadn't been in my bank account or my client roster. It had been in my relationship with myself. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeking external validation and started trusting my own judgment. The woman who had once waited for permission to speak up in meetings was now confidently leading strategic discussions with CEOs. The success of Everstone. Consulting wasn't meaningful because it had proven Henderson wrong. It was meaningful because it had proven me right. Right about my capabilities, right about my vision, right about the kind of professional I wanted to be. The validation I had been seeking from others had been within me all along. I thought about that broken woman who had sat in her car 6 months ago, trembling with humiliation and uncertainty. She had believed that her worth was tied to other people's recognition, that her security came from their approval. But that woman had been carrying something more powerful than she knew, the courage to rebuild, the wisdom to learn, and the strength to grow. The truth was stunning in its simplicity. They hadn't taken anything from me because my value had never been theirs to give or take. They had simply forced me to discover what I had always possessed, but never fully claimed. For the first time since this journey began, I felt genuinely grateful for that awful day in the conference room. Not because it had led to professional success, but because it had led to something far more precious, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. Am I ready to move forward, or is there still something I need to let go of? It's been a year now since that life-altering Tuesday morning, and I'm writing this from my new office, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city where my journey began. Everstone Consulting has grown beyond anything I imagined possible, not just in revenue or client base, but in the impact we're making. We've helped dozens of businesses thrive, created jobs, and built relationships based on mutual respect and genuine value. But the measure of my transformation isn't in the awards on my wall or the speaking engagements I've been invited to. It's in the quiet moments when I catch my reflection in those windows and see someone I genuinely admire. Not because of what she's achieved, but because of who she's become. Last month I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop downtown. The encounter that once would have sent my pulse racing instead felt like meeting a character from an old book I'd once read. He looked tired, stressed, and when he mentioned that Henderson and Associates was still struggling to rebuild their client relationships, I felt only compassion for him. He was still trapped in a system that diminished everyone it touched, including him. "You really landed on your feet, Evelyn," he said with what seemed like genuine admiration. "I always respected your work ethic." "Thank you," I replied simply and meant it. There was no need to point out the irony, no satisfaction in his acknowledgement, no urge to relitigate the past. His opinion, positive or negative, simply didn't factor into my sense of self anymore. The most beautiful part of this journey has been discovering that forgiveness isn't something you do for other people. It's something you do for yourself. I've forgiven Janet, Marcus, and even the system that allowed my worth to be overlooked for so long. Not because they deserved it, but because carrying that resentment was like tending a fire that only burned me. I've also learned to forgive the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet when she should have spoken up, who accepted less than she was worth, who waited for permission to claim her space in the world. She was doing the best she could with the tools she had, and her struggles led to this strength. My clients have become more than professional relationships. They've become partners in creating something meaningful. The Morrison family recently invited me to join their board of directors. Maria's manufacturing company has expanded internationally with our strategic guidance. Each success story reminds me that this was never just about proving my individual worth. It was about creating value that serves something larger than myself. On quiet Sunday mornings, I sometimes think about that woman sitting in her car outside Henderson and Associates, world shattered, future uncertain. I wish I could tell her that the pain she was feeling wasn't an ending, but a beginning. That the betrayal that felt so devastating would become the catalyst for the most authentic, fulfilling chapter of her life. The office I once coveted on the 15th floor seems small now compared to the space I've created for myself, not just physically, but emotionally and professionally. I've built something that can't be taken away because it comes from within, the unshakable knowledge that my worth isn't negotiable. My voice matters, and my vision has value. As I prepare for tomorrow's client meetings, I feel something I hadn't experienced in years before this journey began. Complete alignment between who I am and how I show up in the world. The woman who once sought validation from others now validates herself. The employee who once waited for opportunities now creates them. The person who once feared betrayal now trusts her own judgment above all else. They tried to write the ending to my story, but they had no idea I was just finishing the first chapter. What they meant as an ending became my beginning, and what a beautiful beginning it has been. I am Evelyn Chen, founder and CEO of Everstone Consulting Solutions, but more importantly, I'm someone who knows her worth and isn't afraid to claim it. And that knowledge has set me free.